The Artemis Accords is on a roll, and it's leading to a new form of space diplomacy and space regulation and discussion, space cooperation. Like, there's just so much that's coming out of the Artemis Accords. This afternoon, Armenia is going to become the 43rd signatory of the Artemis Accords, which started in 2020. And it is just ramping up here. I've got the numbers. So we started with 8 original signatories, October 2020. One additional one was added about a month later, so 9 in 2020, 5 in 2021, 9 in 2022, 10 in 2023, and then as of mid-June here, not even completely through half of the year, we are already up to 10 signatories. So like, it's gonna blow out of the water the previous year if it keeps going at this pace. I mean, like, it is just being piled on the number of countries. Pretty soon we're gonna get to a quarter of all the countries of the world that are gonna be signatories to the Artemis Accords. And why is this important? Because it is a collaboration of non-binding agreements and understandings between countries. That is a new way of doing things. So if you think back to the older way, which is still the way that we try to follow today, which is international agreements and treaties. So we've got the Outer Space Treaty, 1967. We've got a couple of smaller treaties after that. Widely adopted, the Outer Space Treaty. Some of the later ones, not so much, like the Moon Treaty. It's pretty much dead. Like, they had a few signatories, but not any of the major powers. So it's one of these things where treaties in the UN, there is still a lot of consensus and a lot of consensus building in the UN between the different 2 UN space regulating bodies. Well, I don't know if regulating is the term, but 2 space bodies. And the UN does meet regularly, and they do discuss important topics related to geopolitics and space. But the general consensus is that the UN is not going to be the modern foundation for space treaties. Instead, we're having these collaborations, where the Artemis Accords is an example of this collaboration. It is a multilateral, non-binding signatory process. What is the actual term here? Non-binding, why does this thing say bilateral? The Wikipedia page is wrong. Talk to Mike Gold if you disagree. So anyway, non-binding multilateral agreements between the United States government and other world governments that elaborates the norms expected to be followed in outer space. So what this is collaborations between countries, especially within their space agencies, but it's a whole government approach. I've been listening to some recordings by the Meridian Space Diplomacy Forum that took place at the end of April. I will include the links to day 1 and 2. They are recorded on YouTube down in the show notes here. It has been illuminating some of the things that have been talked about. For those of you who are interested in this kind of thing, I recommend you check it out. Some of the topics on the Artemis Accords, for example, were really interesting in that they talked about how this is a new way where countries are finding that they can discuss things in a more casual, laid-back, open way than the UN or other mechanisms and other forums provide for. And so it's just a way for countries to come together and talk about these really important topics that doesn't need to be so formal. One of the ladies, she said, doesn't need to have a placard in front of you with who you are. You can just kind of discuss things more openly, which is what we need when things are happening at a rapid pace compared to what they thought in the 1960s. When, 1960s, they envisioned it would just be governments. And now we have commercial entities and so much happening in terms of the proliferation of satellites in LEO and, cislunar lunar exploration and just all of these things that are coming together, probably more rapidly than some thought, much slower than others thought, but it's just a way to keep on talking about these things. So some of these new signatories are probably countries that did not really think that they'd be involved in something like this where you'd be discussing space. So Armenia is signing today. Slovakia and Peru are the 2 latest ones from the end of May. Lithuania, Slovenia, some of these European countries that are much smaller did not probably think that they'd be at a table with some of the large major players talking about space diplomacy and cooperation. And the reason why the Artemis Accords is becoming so much more successful is it is a way for these countries to have a say in, in a way that they didn't before, in a way that isn't so formal that needs to go through every single channel of their government, but instead, yes, it's a whole government approach, but instead it can be a little bit more it can be a little bit more open. These are the things that need to be discussed and be discussed more rapidly and more openly, and just have that ability to have that cooperation and communication that we haven't had previously. But when you're coming together as 43 nations or however many met, I think they had like 39 at the time of the last meeting in Montreal, 39 signatories. I don't know how many of those signatories came to Montreal at the last Artemis Accords meeting, but my understanding is that most of them, almost all of them, come to these meetings to discuss these important topics. And I don't know, again, how frequently they're going to hold meetings for the Artemis Accords, and I don't know when the next one is. The one in Montreal just happened a few weeks ago at the end of May, and so I don't know when they're planning on having another meeting of the Artemis Accords signatories, but you better bet there are probably going to be more signatories involved by the time there's another meeting, and could be well over 50 come and are able to talk more freely about space than they could before in a different forum. So one of the things that is talked about when it comes to the Artemis Accords is that geopolitical competition between the United States and its allies and China and its allies. And I have talked about this in a previous video. I will link it above. It is not mutually exclusive. There are countries that are partnering with China, and there are countries that are partnering with the United States in the Artemis program, and there are countries that are part of the Artemis Accords. And all three of these are different, and none of them are mutually exclusive. China and Russia have not signed the Artemis Accords. My understanding is that they have been unofficially invited to sign it, so there's nothing preventing them from signing it other than the geopolitical tensions going on in the world right now. And space is a trailing indicator in terms of geopolitics. So we have terrestrial geopolitics that take precedence, and then whatever is happening terrestrially, we see that follow in space. So so what we can imagine is that if there is cooling tensions, worsening tensions with a particular country or set of countries terrestrially, then we're going to see that down the line, that kind of attitude reflected in space. Whereas if there's warming, agreements between two countries, they're becoming closer, we're going to see that in space down the line. One of the things that was pointed out by Anatoly Zak today on Twitter X was that Armenia is actually stepping away from a Russian-led collective security treaty organization, around the same time that they are now today signing the Artemis Accords. And it's probably not coincidence. Same thing was talked about with India. When India signed the Artemis Accords about a year ago, June of last year, there was a lot of talk about how India is moving away from older associations and moving more towards Western associations. And so usually India is more neutral when it comes to these kinds of agreements. So it was a big surprise and a big win for the State Department and NASA to get India on board with the Artemis Accords. So you just see these interesting geopolitical partnerships and establishments where the Artemis Accords is meant to be inclusive. And there was one point, so Michael is one of the members who, at the time he was part of NASA, and he really was a founding member of the Artemis Accords, like helped write them, helped to kick it off. And there was a time when he was giving so many speeches that I pretty much had memorized I listened to so many of his speeches, I pretty much memorized what he said. But one of his catchphrases is less Star Wars, more Star Trek, as in less of the fighting, combat, adversarial nature in space, and more of the collaborative United Federation of Planets kind of thing going on in space. This is for you, Mike. So I agree with that mentality, and I think all of us agree with that mentality. Now, of course, we still have war in space. Like, you can't deny that. You can't deny that, communication satellites, imaging satellites, reconnaissance, like so many things are happening that supplement and contribute to our current and past wars, starting in the 90s to all the way to today. And you just can't deny that we are using space as a domain to help the warfighter on the ground. Like, that is undeniable, and that is only going to continue as space becomes more accessible to the broader global community. We're not going to get away from human nature. Humans are adversarial. Humans are combative. Humans will have conflicts in space. conflicts on Earth that we use space to contribute towards, and then we will have conflicts in space. Like, it's just inevitable. That's what we do. But if we have already established collaborations, norms of behavior, ways of communication, ways that we can understand how we're supposed to behave and what happens if something is not going the way that we anticipate, or there's something unexpected or unexplained, or there's just a misunderstanding. We use communication channels. Like, the more that we have that, the better. And so I honestly think it would be to everybody's benefit to join the Artemis Accords. Like, I am biased like that. I fully admit it. And so I welcome China and Russia to sign the Artemis Accords. So I think this is really important. If you haven't been paying attention to the Artemis Accords, I highly recommend that you watch to see just how many countries and which countries are joining, because you're going to see more and more countries, smaller and larger, smaller countries and larger players joining the Artemis Accords. And congratulations to NASA, to the U.S. State Department, and to all those who have been working to put the Artemis Accords together and to grow it.